queries, making comments during the programme. And this programme lasts through until 1 o'clock in the morning. There are no gimmicks on this programme. You won't hear any echoey voices, and it's live, coming to you from a reputed haunted place. But our panel: Lee Lacey is a famous Nottingham medium. Chris Skye is a white witch as opposed to a black witch. Diane Blatherwick is a psychic investigator. And Canon John Finney is advisor in evangelism in the Diocese of Southall. Well, Lee, let me come to you first of all. I don't know if it's perhaps a little too early to ask you, but do you feel anything special about the place we're in now?
Not at this moment, no.
In fact, we're told that if anything ghostly should happen, it would be very cold, and it really is quite warm in this cellar, I think, with all the people that are here.
That's correct, yes. It's a natural thing that when psychic phenomena happens, that the temperature does drop quite dramatically and gets quite icy, in fact. But as you say, it's fairly warm here at the moment.
Are we then creating the wrong environment for anything to happen down here?
Very often when you've got cameras or microphones and people buzzing about, yes, it does tend to kill any activity that is there. I haven't really had a chance yet to wander around this cellar and see if I do pick up anything on it, but I could do this and report back to you if I do find anywhere in the cellar.
The recording. This was recorded in a terrace house in Grantham. And the story was that there was a teenager in the house. There nearly always is, of course, with a poltergeist, a teenager. This was a young girl. And the house, emanating from the house, was a lot of noise at night, fairly late at night, I think before midnight, a lot of noise. And this was disturbing nearby neighbours. And it was the neighbours who called the police in Grantham, though you can't get a word out from the police, of course, at Grantham. You hardly ever can, and there's good reason for this, which we might go into later. But this particular house had great thumps coming from it, and the neighbours called the police. The police contacted a psychic researcher, a very well-known one, an internationally famous one, who went to the house. It all happened in an upstairs bedroom. The girl is in bed, and this recording was made of the poltergeist at work. The psychic researcher made that recording at the bottom of the stairs, went upstairs, and in the bedroom there are large pieces of Victorian furniture. There is a very large double wardrobe. No chance at all that that teenager could have moved it, and the wardrobe is all askew. The furniture has all been moved out of position, and those were the thumps that were recorded. Now that's a fairly rare recording, but a good recording of something that happened. The sad thing is about that family, the neighbours were so incensed at the noises coming from the house that they virtually hounded the family out of the house. And when they moved, the poltergeist just vanished, wasn't heard from again in that house, and wasn't heard from again in that family. John Finney, if I can just come to you on this one point about the poltergeist, because you were nodding when I mentioned the poltergeist. Have you investigated anything at all like that?
Certainly I have come across situations where things have flown around rooms, crashing into walls, and so forth. I think nearly always it's associated with teenagers, particularly female teenagers, and I don't know that anybody's got any real idea as to why that should be. It is also often associated with unhappiness, division within the family, bitterness, sexual abuse, all that type of thing. But I found, when dealing with these, that the power of Christ, in a sense, quite quickly and easily overcomes this. I find a straightforward prayer in each room is quite sufficient to deal with it.
Yes, in fact, there's an example in Mansfield that I might quote later where the very thing that you've described has happened. But we're now going to go to another radio car location, and another reputedly haunted situation. In our Radio Derby radio car, we've got reporter Gary Andrews. Gary,
Good evening. Well, let me describe where I am. We're sitting in the cellar of the Malt Shovel pub in Shardlow. Now, sitting approximately about 2 yards away from where our ghost is supposed to have appeared in the past. We're right next to the Trent and Mersey Canal. It's quite a misty evening here in Shardlow. And our ghost's name is Humphrey. Now, Humphrey is the ghost of a tramp who was reputedly drowned in a vat by one of the foremen of the maltings way back in the 1700s. The pub was built in 1799, but our ghost first appeared in around about 1962 or 63 when the pub underwent major alterations. It was the alterations which seemed to bring Humphrey out, as it were. He was first discovered by an apprentice who was carrying timber for the builder who was doing the operations, and he was pushed backwards down the stairs once he'd put his timber down. Apart from that, we've had sightings since then. The landlady and the landlord have seen Humphrey. Our present landlord is Peter Harrison and his wife Gillian, who we'll be talking to later. We've also got Ron Adderall here, who's a ghostbuster. He hasn't seen Humphrey here, but he's spotted other ghosts in the past, and he's got rid of a few too. Apart from that, we've got the old landlady of the pub, who was here for approximately 27 years, and she was here when Humphrey first appeared. So that's going to be interesting talking to her later on. No sighting as yet. As I say, we're sitting in the cellar, approximately 2 yards from where Humphrey first appeared. Some very strange things have happened in the Malt Shovel, as I've been discovering since I arrived. So we're all sitting here with bated breath. Dennis, back to you.
Thank you very much indeed, Gary. Very much indeed. There's no classic location for sighting a ghost, and there certainly isn't a rule which says that sightings are always, for example, at night and in deserted houses. Individuals report encounters with what they believe are spirits or ghosts in a whole host of situations. For example, back in 1980, there was a case of two ladies coming across a shadowy figure in, of all places, a local supermarket in Berwick-upon-Tweed. Reporter Helen Pickles spoke to them afterwards, and they told her about the moment.
The ghost was in the centre of us, in the middle, and it was just a black outline, shape of a man's head and man's shoulders, but there was no bottom half to it, just a black shape in the middle of the freezer, and then it just disappeared.
And I just seen the same. I just looked up and I seen the outline of her head, and it was all black, and then the shoulders, and it was just down to the waist. There was no legs.
So how far away from you was it?
Just about, I'd say about a foot.
That's all.
In between the two of us.
It was just black. You couldn't see any clothes.
No clothes, nothing. It was just a black shadow. And I mean, you can see how light it is in here. It's not as if the lights were wrong or anything like that. And I had seen it about 2 months beforehand myself. Judith didn't see it that time.
I thought she was just joking, and then I realised when I seen it myself.
Did you try and touch it?
No. We just stood still, stock still till it went away, and that was it. And I says, quick Judith, let's get out of here.
I had a box in my hand because I was going to pass it to Linda, and I just dropped it and stood still. Oh God, it was really frightening.
And what did everyone else who works here in the shop say when you told them? Did they tell you not to be so stupid?
I think half of them wanted to believe it, and the other half didn't. They says, I didn't believe that they've really seen anything at all. But when we went to the manager after that, and I says, really, it's true, we have seen something. And he believed us then, I think.
So I took John Allardyce, the manager, to the site of the alleged appearance. And as we hung back in the doorway of the freezer, we tried to imagine what Linda must have seen.
By the looks of it, I think she did see something, because it was as white as a sheet.
There's no chance it could have been a shadow cast by anything?
Well, fridges do have this condensation that does come round, which it could have been. And sometimes you do get it gets a bit hazy, but nothing to what she's described to me anyway, this black outline.
Did you investigate it any further?
Yeah. The girl in the shop, she went down to Francis Cow, who is a local historian here, and he informed her that years ago it used to be a public hanging yard,
And when you heard that, what was your reaction?
You hear about mediums and so forth, seeing things, and I'm beginning to go along with it now.
Well, there you are. That was a ghost in a supermarket. Don't forget, you can ring us on Nottingham 343434 if you have a story. Bruce, we have those noises, but in fact there was no noise heard by anyone. I mean, it picked up by the tape recorder, but no one else heard that noise.
No, the tape recorder, this has been amplified to make it as a little fuzz, but at that particular time there was no aircraft in the vicinity, there was no radio stations broadcasting, nothing. And let us bear in mind that this was recorded in a squash court, not in a hangar or anything of that nature. There was no metallic objects in the squash court at all.
Our medium, Lee Lacey, would like to have a word with you, Bruce.
Yeah.
Right.
There's a couple of points. The thing that's disturbing me a little bit about this, Dennis, is that the implication is that all these things are supernatural noises and things. It sounded like old beer crates rolling around to me there. But the thing that bothers me was a statement earlier that all airfields are haunted, which I think is rubbish, absolute rubbish. Where any dramatic event has been, where there's been murders, where there has been people that have high tensions and things have got up, they leave what I like to call a tape recorder effect. They leave implanted something that sensitive people can pick up. And it doesn't necessarily mean to say that there is a ghost there. And the implication is, or what I was getting the impression was, that if they're not careful, every airfield tomorrow, they'll have people going out ghost hunting, which would be silly and a bit disastrous.
Yeah, and the Reverend John Finney, I believe, you want to come in on that one?
Yes, I used to be in the Air Force, and I can remember going out when I was night flying, and it is a very, very eerie feeling. The dim red lights, dim blue lights of the runway and so forth. A little bit of early morning mist swirling around, and you can see almost anything.
That's right.
At the same time, one has to remember that from those airfields, in some cases, obviously, people did take off and didn't come back. And there's those sorts of memories at the back of many people's minds, I think. And putting those two together, the slightly eerie feel, which is a very understandable thing in that sort of area, and plus the memories, and you very, very quickly begin to get the sort of stories. And like Lee, I felt very unhappy about the idea that every airfield was haunted.
Yes, but let's get back to Bruce Halpenny, because to be fair to Bruce, you've had a lot of stories given to you.
Yes.
By many, many people.
Yes, I mean, Lord Balfour of Inkai, who's 90 tomorrow. I mean, the Montrose Ghost. I mean, all the people are Air Vice Marshal, squadron leaders. Absolutely nothing to gain. If you would just tell me an airfield where no tragedy took place, then I might believe you.
Are you really saying, Bruce, that there is a ghost on every airfield?
I'm saying there's a presence, or a ghost. I mean, it doesn't mean to say that you actually physically see a ghost. I mean, people have seen half ghosts. They've felt things. They've heard things. I mean, let us say, I can tell you. I mean, I'm ex-provo and security officer. I don't think there's an airfield that there's a section where all the dogs would walk across. There's certain sections, and I can name most of them, even today, where the Scampton, and I've only 10 days ago had a sighting of Nigger again. So, there isn't. When I repeat that every airfield, yes, you tell me an airfield where no tragedy took place.
But you're really, it's a question of definition, really. You're saying presence.
Yes, you don't physically have to see something. There's a feeling. I mean, I've two old ladies who went by to see where their son was. I mean, and we're talking now 75. And as they were there, that they just felt a cold draft. Well, I mean, these people had nothing to gain by saying otherwise. They'd never have dreamt of saying anything.
Andy?
Yes, hello.
Yes, can we come back to you, because I'd like to take a call, but I hope you'll stay there with Bruce, and we'll have another word with you. Is that all right?
Yes, we're maintaining our watch, but nothing yet, I'm afraid.
Right, but of course, if there was anything at all, you would be in touch with us, and we'll come to you immediately.
Indeed.
Fine. We have a call from David Lowe of Draycott. David,
Hello.
what's your story?
Well, it's quite a it's quite a long story if you're prepared to listen. It involves quite a few occasions. I left the Navy in 1971, and we moved to Bristol. And we bought this house, and we bought it off an elderly lady. And we did sort of the deal with her and her son and her son's wife, not sort of realising that I suppose it didn't really strike us at the time, there was no man involved. Anyway, over a period of months, we worked, and I'd never sort of done any DIY or anything, or any renovation before. And I got sort of a bit of an appreciation of it, an old lady living on the road. There'd not been a lot done in the house. And I worked on the bedroom first, got that sort of ship shape, and then walked downstairs into the front room. And it was in quite a state, but it was a nice room, and there was a lot of sort of ornamental work that needed repairing. So I worked on it for a long while, over the months, and eventually got it, spot on, so we liked it. And on the day we had I'd finished and done a lot, parquet tile, everything, and we had a 3-piece suite delivered, and an Indian rug, and I put it all in the room that night while my wife was out working. And when she came back, I took her and showed her, I'd hung pictures up, and it looked absolutely spot on. It was a transformation. It didn't look anything like it used to look. And so she came home about 10 o'clock at night, and I showed her. I said, what do you think of that? Oh, great, lovely. Went to another room, had a dream, watched TV, just going to bed. And I said, well, we'll have a look again, because I was quite pleased, quite pleased with myself. I opened the door, switched the light on. I said, oh, yeah, great. Switched the light out, and as I switched the light out, my wife was stood behind me in the passageway. And I literally catapulted back into her and knocked her flying. Because as I switched the light out, there was a man stood in the dead centre of the room. And as the light went out, it was like almost like a cartoon drawing of someone going smaller, because the figure stayed the same shape, and it went smaller and smaller down to the centre of the room. And it wasn't something that it could have been, I didn't see it or I did see it. It was still there as I was looking at it, as I flung myself backwards, okay. And that was the first occasion. And my wife, she said, what's the matter? I was shaking, and I explained to her. And, it might have been, we laughed about it a few days afterwards. That was that.
She didn't see anything at all?
No, she didn't see anything.
And was she in line of sight to see anything?
Possibly or possibly not. But I think the fact that I reacted so sharply and sort of went into her, she just popped her head down the door and said no, she wasn't.
And it happened again?
Pardon?
Did it happen again?
That hasn't happened again. But a little while later, probably a year later, probably even longer than that, it was a summer evening, and we were coming home. We'd been out with two friends of ours from down the road. We were all in the same car. I was sitting in front with the driver, and the two ladies were sitting in the back. And as we came down the road, our house faces up the road, and it was still light, and the chap who was driving, he says, oh, I see the Lows are in. And as we've been coming down the road, I could see a chap at the window, our bedroom window, in a white shirt, sleeves rolled up, elbows on the windowsill, hands under his chin, looking down the road. And I thought, well, it's just a reflection or something. But when he said that, I thought, strange. I went back to their house for a drink. And I said to Elaine, I said, well, what did you say? And she said the same as me. And I was so shaken by it, I went back to her, I left them there, made the excuse of going to the toilet, came along to our house, let myself in, even though it was still light. I was a bit shaken by it. I went around the house, you would stamp in the shower and looked around, and there was nobody there. And when we all talked around afterwards, we'd all seen exactly the same thing. Well, one or two sort of eerie things happened, but nothing you could put your finger on in the months afterwards. And it turns out that my wife said to me one night that as she walked through the kitchen, switched the light off and went to bed, if she was the last to bed, she would never dare turn round and look into the living room because the hairs on the back of her neck were standing up. And that was exactly the same thing that's been happening to me for a long while.
David, very grateful for you telling us.
Yeah.
I mean, the way you tell it, it's hard to say. It's hard to say what it is. I'm going to ask the panel here what they think it is. David, thank you very much.
Well, there's more if you want to hear it.
More?
Yeah.
What more?
Or am I going on too long?
No. I mean, we're interested to hear the story. It's just that we're getting a reaction from the panel here. In fact, well, let me go to Diane Blatherwick, our psychic investigator. And what David said, the business about being pushed back from the doorway, the business about his hair on the back of his neck standing up, that's a pattern, isn't it, that is sometimes there with this sort of thing.
Yes, it is.
Have you investigated that sort of thing?
Something similar. You see, there's a difference between a ghost and a poltergeist, but they have the same MO, if you like. The thing that interested me is the house, or has it reputed to be haunted before?
David?
Just so by.
Well, no. As I mentioned at the beginning, we bought the house and we dealt with a lady, an elderly lady, and a son and daughter-in-law, and we never sort of and we never talked, about any man involved, an old man, who would be the husband of the lady we bought it off.
Yes.
Well, what I'm coming to is the fact that, as I said, the chap in the white shirt with the sleeves rolled up, we were talking to our next door neighbours who have been in their house for quite a while, and we described this, and they said, oh, that's Ernie. That was the chap who lived here before, and he died in the room where I first switched the light out and got this sensation of being thrown back and saw somebody shrink down.
But he didn't die violently, as far as you know.
He did not die violently. It was a strange death. He got knocked off his moped, broke his leg, plaster on too tight, and it caught a lot, and he died.
Hang on, Lee Lacey, our medium, wants to come in here.
Yeah, hi. Would you class yourself as being psychic or at all sensitive? Have you seen anything apart from this?
I think perhaps I would be sensitive, but I've always been afraid to sort of delve into it.
Yeah, sure.
Because I feel that I might find things out I don't want to know.
Yeah.
And I honestly feel they would be sensitive, yeah.
Did you find these, we'll call them for want of a better term, apparitions frightening at all to you?
Only frightening in a sense that they startled me.
They startled you, yeah.
But they've never... this is something I was going to say to you as I progress, but it's never been threatening. Never, ever felt threatening.
David, when was the last time you felt anything at all?
Several years ago.
So nothing's happened for several years?
No.
All right. David, I'll ask you to finish there because we've got so many calls to get through, so much material to get through, but we've been fascinated by your story here.
Well, there's another short bit, if I could just go
on then,
quickly.
Yeah.
We've had children since. The children have said, who's the man at the window? Because we've seen somebody move away, and we've gone, when they were very little, and there was no one there. My son had a bad asthma attack when he was 9 months old. He's never had it since. I was in the kitchen, downstairs, a long, long way away from where his bedroom is, and I heard him struggling for breath. I went through the house up to his bedroom. I got the radio on in the kitchen. The wife had got TV on in the living room. I went upstairs to his bedroom, and he was struggling for breath. An infant of that age couldn't make much of a noise. And it's almost since then that we've heard or sensed nothing. I wonder if that could be a pointer.
That's interesting. David, thank you very much indeed for calling. Thank you very much. There are many classic ghost stories which tell of motorists driving along empty roads.
Travelling about 60 mile an hour, I saw this dull patch in the road, and I must have got about another 5 to 10 yards ahead of where I was, and I realised that was a figure.
So what did you do?
I just jammed on my brakes, hoping to miss him, and I skidded straight for him. There's nothing I could do, and just swung round, and I sort of blinked while I thought I was going to hit him. And when I opened my eyes again, he was just going like as if I was driving through a cloud. He was going through the car. Didn't make no noise, imprint, or didn't jolt the car in any way. So I got out and had a look round, and there was nothing in sight at all.
What did it look like?
That was it was fairly tall. That was like an old bloke between about 60, 65 with a hunched back, like looking direct at my car, like as I was approaching him. He had like a cape sort of thing on with the like sacks and boots with the laces all the way around. His hair was long, well, curly and grey, like a judge, you know, like them wigs they wear. That was more or less like that. It's a silly way of describing it, but that's exactly what it looked like.
Were you frightened?
No, not at the time I weren't, but when I got down the old pub I realised that I was frightened after all.
Do you believe in ghosts?
I do now.
Ivan Bunn is a local amateur ghost hunter. He's been following this particular ghost since 1976, and he's found that Andrew's description of the man and the place tallies almost exactly with 7 other reports he's received. So is he convinced?
Well, I'm convinced that people are seeing something on the road which defies explanation, but whether it's in the ghost or not remains to be seen.
It's a fairly straight piece of road, isn't it?
Yes,
Ivan?
it's a very straight piece of road, and normally there should be no reason at all for cars to swerve and leave the road. Well, there's been a whole string of one-car accidents over the last 10 years and more. People leaving the road, swerving up, hitting trees. There's been 2 or 3 people killed along here quite recently, and there's been no explanation as to why the car should leave the road. And quite often the inquest has been left open as to the cause of the death.
Last night's sighting was reported to Lowestoft Police, one of several they've received, but Sergeant Robson wouldn't agree that the so-called ghost had caused many accidents.
Not really. There's nothing to suggest that this ghost, if in fact there is a ghost, has caused accidents or has caused anything else on the road.
Do the descriptions vary very much?
The descriptions vary, but they always seem to be of an old man in 19th century dress. The strange thing is that he seems to appear to walk about 2 feet above the road, and it's strange also that when the new dual carriageway on the A12 was put in, the whole road was lowered about 2 feet.
Well, there's a strange road happening in Norfolk. Lincolnshire has its very own section of road, which is apparently prone to accidents of this kind. They happen at Cameringham, a small village a few miles north of Lincoln on the B1398, which runs parallel to the old Roman Ermine Street. Locals know it as the Cameringham Light, and some say it's really a ghost of Queen Boadicea and her chariot. And on the Derbyshire-Nottinghamshire border, there's Hardwick Hall, built in Elizabethan times. In fact, it's preserved as a fine example of Elizabethan architecture. In 1976, a couple were in their car travelling through Hardwick Park when they saw the figure of a hooded monk in their headlights. The figure seemed to walk towards them and then turned and disappeared. The monk wore a black habit, but they couldn't see his hands or feet, though his face was described as a brilliant white, almost luminous. And 2 occupants of another car that passed by a few minutes earlier had also seen the hooded monk. The previous week, the monk was seen by 2 young ladies and 2 policemen. A shadowy figure has often been seen in the Blue Room at Hardwick Hall and nearly always disappeared straight through a window. Now, it's interesting that policemen were involved in this Hardwick Hall incident and in that Norfolk incident as well. And I mentioned very earlier in the programme about the police being often called in when there's something strange going on, but they will rarely talk about it. Why? Well, I once talked to a policeman, and I worked very closely with him in a number of incidents to do with the police, and I asked him about this, because at that time I was chasing up the case of a ghostly cat in Radford in Nottingham. And this cat had a habit, it wasn't there was nothing there, but the cat had a habit of rubbing itself, as cats do, against people's legs. So the lady of the house called in a policeman. And when the policeman was there, the cat rubbed itself against the policeman's leg. Now, I talked to the policeman afterwards and he said nothing happened. And when I talked to my friend in the police, and I said, why won't police come straight? Because, you know, if they said that there were ghosts and there were ghostly happenings and that they had investigated them, then people would start to believe. And he said, look, if a policeman said anything at all like that, he would lose his credibility. And above all, the police have got to have credibility. It's a bit sad that, but you can understand it and you can have sympathy with the police not really wanting to involve themselves in any report that would lose their credibility. We have a call from Jean Padley of Sleaford. Jean.
Hello?
What's your story, love?
Well, my ex-husband and I had a club between Lincoln and Sleaford. It was called the Lake Rendezvous Club. It's now called Ashby Country Club. It's a very old building. It was privately owned before it was a nightclub. And we used to have gambling in a small scale for a facility for the club. And one Saturday evening, we went and we was having the room what we normally had decorated. So we went upstairs. considering it's a very big old building, the room was quite small. And just before midnight, it was a strange feeling. There was a girl called Ruth that was the other croupier. I was on the roulette wheel and she was on the blackjack table. And dead on midnight, we had some ashtrays scattered all over, and there was very thin glass. There was from Cook's Brewery. I can't remember the motive on them, but there was very fine glass. And every one of those ashtrays split in half, and I mean in half.
Every one of them?
Every one of them. A clean cut.
Well, let's see if anybody can explain that here. Okay? Our medium, Lee Lacey.
It's very difficult to say. I mean...
And be honest, Lee, even if this lady, if Jean had called you into the club, you'd have been there after the event, and you'd be... Well, it would be as blank as it is now.
Yeah. I don't really know, Dennis. I mean, psychic force can do all sorts of things. Throw people across rooms, break glasses, these kind of things. There was obviously some psychic force there. And what was creating it, I wouldn't know unless I went and investigated it.
The window...
Mm-hmm.
The window was facing the courtyard. And I've never experienced this, but the doorman, he's died now, but the doorman that was then said that a certain time of the year, or times of the year, if he sat just inside the door of the entrance hall, there was someone at 12 o'clock felt on his shoulder. Now, I don't know that. I've never experienced it. But Mrs. Ward, who has the building now, has seen a ghost there. But the only thing I know is these ashtrays. We wasn't frightened. The men were. They ran downstairs like mad. The room was full. And there's obviously, people in Lincolnshire, I'm sure tonight, that's listening that was there when the experience happened. But every ashtray of that kind was broken and cut straight in half.
Jean, very grateful to you ringing.
All right.
Thank you very much.
Bye-bye.
Now, amongst our panel we have a white witch, and we haven't spoken to Chris Skye for quite some time. Chris, you were talking...
And while the programme's been going on, I have felt it get colder, the thermometer's recording that. But at the same time, I was aware, and it's only an awareness, I didn't see, of a presence standing behind your producer in that corner. And it was a very fleeting glimpse. And this was about 10 minutes before we started to notice that the temperature was going down. But it was a very fleeting glimpse, and I feel that there is something in this cellar. In the general area, and I don't know if you have a trailer mic or a mic where one can go around, but it would be interesting to go and have a look round and see if there's anything in any other rooms. Maybe they're frightened of Dennis McCarthy.
Well, I don't know, we'll be able to do that. Canon John Finney, do you think that if there would be anything, and Lee is only saying that he's aware, that's all, he's not saying anything more definite than that. As a priest, are you likely to put off a ghost?
I think the question of the temperature obviously is something which we need to watch, though I've got a thermometer just behind me and it's registering exactly the same as it was 10 minutes ago.
Well, this
6 to 7 degrees.
This one is.
Well, that's made by the BBC apparently, so that may be the reason for it.
Yes. But yes.
Certainly you do sometimes find rooms in houses, particularly where strange things have happened. Sometimes I find there have been seances in those particular rooms, or where there have been particular violent incidents, suicide, such like, where there's undoubtedly a feeling of dis-ease until, in the name of Christ, they're told to get lost. And nearly always the situation is then that the situation rights itself very quickly indeed.
There is a form of exorcism, isn't there, in the church?
Yes,
and I was told it really goes back centuries.
Oh, it goes back to the time of Christ.
The actual prayers that are being used today?
Very often that we use the same words that Christ himself used. There's not a service of exorcism which I would want to use. Normally, I mean, it's rather like a doctor. When you go to a doctor, he doesn't immediately say, right, well, it's time you had surgery. You try a few pills first, and it's only if it's really bad that you go to the heavy stuff. But normally with any situation like this, one would try to pray through the situation. Very often it clears itself quite easily with that. Sometimes, though, it is necessary to go into a place, or sometimes even with a person. And normally what I would do is to go through each room in the house, read just a short passage of the Bible, say a brief prayer. Sometimes you become aware in one of the rooms that there is something unusual in this, in which case one would tend to make one's prayer rather more solid, and I would want to say something like, in the name of Jesus Christ, go, because you have no more part, and may the peace of God be in this place.
Does that assume that anything there is evil?
Yes, you get a feel of evil, of conflict almost, as though it's difficult to put it except in spatial terms, but it's almost though you're coming into something, an area which has evil in it, and you're then saying, get lost.
But would you say that about every ghost? I mean, the ghost that is reputed to be here.
I wouldn't know anything about it. I wouldn't. Each particular situation has its own thing, and without being in the situation, this is one of the difficulties when people say, you know, what do you think about this, that, the other, without actually talking to people concerned, I mean, you're probably going to need to talk for an hour or more to the people concerned to really find out what's at the root of it all.
Every ghost or roving spirit isn't evil, John.
You don't think so?
Oh, no.
I mean, like Humphrey, for example, we've been talking about in Derby, sounds quite a friendly character.
Oh, yes. Well, when I first moved to London, so I'm Bedfordshire born, I moved into a little terraced house in Plaistow in the East End, or Plaster as the locals called it, and I used to, at that time, be very into continental cooking, used to experiment, and it was a little 3 up, 3 down, a little kitchen at the back outside loo, and I was doing these dishes, and I'm a medium, so it makes a difference, but I was very conscious of a lady that really was getting disturbed because I was making these unholy smells and cooking these unusual dishes in her kitchen. Now, all I did was because I was able to tune in with her psychically, I was able to explain to her that it wasn't her kitchen anymore, that she didn't live there anymore, and that she had no right interfering, and she, in the end, went quite peaceably. I did a bit of checking and found out that, in fact, the house during the war had, in fact, been bombed, and that bottom floor had been flattened, and I feel this is why she was hanging about. She was quite friendly. She was just a little disturbed. She thought it was still her kitchen. She thought she was still alive, and that, what's this bloke doing coming in here cooking these nasty things in my kitchen?
You know, something that's quite interesting, and it just struck me about you four here tonight, is that if somebody has got something and they're rather disturbed at something in the house, who do they call on? A medium, a white witch, a psychic investigator, or a priest?
Well, there's nothing to stop any one of us helping.
But who's best at getting rid of whatever is...
Well, one of the things I'd like to take up with John, if I may, Dennis, that you say in the name of Jesus Christ, depart this place, and you say it usually works. Okay, I'll take your word for that it does. But if you've dislodged a spirit, say in this cellar there was an evil spirit, and you had managed to, by exorcising it, get rid of it, where's it gone?
I didn't give the full prayer. The full prayer...
No, well then I'm not aware of, and this is why I'm taking it up with you.
Yes, you're quite right to do so, because Jesus himself spoke about the dangers of, if you like, merely expelling something, and then, in a way, having it swept and cleaned, and he goes and gets all his friends and comes back in again. And in the prayer, one would always want to say, in the name of Jesus Christ, get lost, go to the place which is prepared for you by God.
Yeah, fine.
So that there, in a sense, there is a terminus, that is the end of it.
But you see, the spiritualist would, again, get in touch with and talk to the entity and persuade it that it wasn't here, it should go to its rightful place, and there would be people on the other side, in the other world, that would help it and help it progress.
Yes, one does sometimes obviously find yourself talking through the person concerned to something which is of evil. And very often they are evil and are seen to be evil and need to be told to go.
Oh, yeah.
Well, we've had dozens of calls, I'm told, and you're still invited to call us on Nottingham 343434. If there's any strange phenomena that's happening now, you might ring us on Nottingham 343434. We have radio cars standing by. We could well get to you. But let's take some calls now. Helen Heath of Leicester is calling. Helen?
Hello, Dennis.
Yes, love. What have you got to say?
I've got 2 or 3 stories, actually, but one is we went to stay in London to look after my son-in-law's grandfather while his mother was away. And it was my job to listen for him in the night in case he called out, in case he wanted to go to the toilet. And after about 2 weeks, well, I used to get out each night, but after about 2 weeks I heard him call, and I got out of bed, and this time there was a figure of his sister, Auntie Mary, who I'd known before she died, and she was standing in the doorway. And I just stood there and looked at her, and I moved towards her, but then went back to the bedroom. The next morning I said to Grandpa, I thought I heard you call last night, and he said, yes, but don't worry, Mary was there. The next night he called out again, and in the doorway was Auntie Mary. This time I decided to go through the door, and as I went to open the door, it seemed to open on its own, and the apparition, if you like, of Auntie Mary entered the bedroom and stooped over Grandpa's bed. Then she stood aside when I went to help Grandpa with his commode, and I waited, and she still stood in the room. And then I helped Grandpa get back into bed and kissed him goodnight and left the bedroom. And in the morning I told Grandpa that I'd seen Auntie Mary. Only he said, she comes every night, she stays with me in the day if no one's there in the house. And again, while we were there, my husband played Scottish music, but always in about the middle of the playing, the record stopped. And we mentioned it to Grandpa, and he said, oh, Auntie Mary doesn't like Scottish music, and it always happens. We never get the end of the record. And when he died, my son-in-law's mother said that Mary went the same night as Grandpa went. And, you know, she regularly came in previous to that. And then another time I was at school working in the kitchen, preparing the meals, and we were at a special school where mentally handicapped children were, and Elizabeth was a small child, and unfortunately she was dying. But before that, she used to run about the school and come in and out of the kitchen, and a little mischievous she was. But as time went on, she was taken...
Well, I saw your reaction first, because you turned and looked at you, behind you as if you had the feeling that there was something there. And at the same time, I felt something pass us very, very quickly from left to right.
Can you describe what it was?
No, I can't. It passed so fast I just didn't have a chance to see what it was.
Can you try and sort of work out what this might indicate?
Whether it was connected with the airfield, I don't know. All I can say is there was something definitely there that passed very, very quickly.
But as I didn't see it, why should I believe it?
Well, you did look around as if you had the feeling there was someone behind you. And I noticed you looking round as it happened.
Now, if you're listening at home, you might be thinking, what a load of old rubbish, don't believe it. But our other expert also felt the same thing. Bruce Halpenny, how would you interpret it?
Yes, we all more or less simultaneously, we were expecting to see something. When you say, I didn't see anything, why should I believe it? The thing is, you don't have to see it, as I've said previously. And you felt something. There was a draft that was going from left to right. We all looked into the same direction. By this time it had passed over the vehicle. We were all preoccupied with something else, preparing here with headphones and one thing and another. So if we'd been more or less, someone could look back and look across to us, would have seen that we'd all looked.
Now, at the time of our last broadcast, there was no traffic going past at all, so it's obviously not headlights. But the fact we're on a disused airfield, and you were saying, Bruce, that there are earth spirits in disused airfields, wherever they are we perhaps infringing on their ground? How would you interpret that?
Yes, this is what I should say, that you are definitely infringing on their ground, yes.
And what about John?
Yes, I agree completely. You see, this is their home. To them it's their home, and we're strangers in their home.
Well, I wonder if anybody else saw it. We asked the questions. Dennis, any ideas at all?
Well, if anybody would like to ring us on Nottingham 343434, we're glad to put them on the air, Andy.
Okay, but at the moment it's all quiet. The lights over the other side of the airfield have all gone out, so we're certainly almost the only civilization on here.
Right,
Can I
we'll
say
come
that?
back
Is
to you
that right?
later.
Okay.
Thank you. Lincolnshire. We're in the cellar at the Hippo Club on Bridlesmith Gate in Nottingham. And can I just explain to you that the cellar is really in two parts. There's a room being built into the cellar, and it's the small room that we've been operating in this evening. I've come outside into the main cellar area by the barrels of beer and the pumps, which are all quiet tonight because the owner of the Hippo Club has very kindly stopped the noise of the pumps, which would have ruined our broadcast in October 1963. On the line from Leicester, Jim Barwell. Jim.
Same sort.
So this is quite weird because we've got a door that isn't locked, but apparently is locked itself. I'm not going to say there's anything strange there, but we're trying to open it at the moment. And when I came down here a week ago just to look around the place, this door just pulled open. Now it won't. It is open. Right, it's open now. So let's open the door and move a piece of cable, top and bottom. And the door opens to reveal
a little corner,
a corner, and there's some breeze block that's been cemented, and that's just a few years old. There's a red brick on one side that's it feels very horrible. That does, nasty and slimy.
And it's been bricked up with breeze block.
Yeah, and Stuart, do you know there's a little gap and there's loads of fallen masonry.
That's right.
What's
I
in
am told that is on top of what became a pit during the Civil War, down which many, many bodies were actually placed.
And Lee has now gone over to the corner where he's put his hands up against some fallen masonry.
The only where if I take it there is a pit here, and the only impression I'm getting is I'm putting my hands out really to see if I can sense anything, and I'm overcome with a great sadness as I go here, and it's the feeling of unhappiness, sadness, of some sad event has happened on these premises, and it's the feeling of I just feel sad. I don't feel frightened or that there's anything to worry me. It's just a feeling of great sadness.
And this is in this particular corner?
In this particular corner. That's why I put my hands in it, to see if I can
All right, I tell you what, we're in now a little cupboard, isn't it? It's no bigger than a cupboard. Go to another corner, Lee, and go to that corner there, the opposite corner, and tell me if you feel anything there at all.
It's a fairly negative corner. There's not much in this corner at all, but I'm interested more in the other one.
But the other one is the interior wall leading into the cellar.
Yeah.
You feel anything here?
People are going to say we're crazy, and that we're imagining things. But I can only tell you, put your hand around above me, Dennis. There's no cobwebs, is there? That you can feel.
There's no cobwebs, no nothing.
But I have literally got as if there's cobwebs all over my face. And I can feel this, like, crawly cobwebs on my face.
Just let me touch your face.
Yeah, go ahead.
There's nothing here at all.
No.
There's nothing.
No.
So do you want to sort of get them away from your face? Do you feel that?
No, it's no problem to me. It's not bothering me. But it's just a feeling that's here. And I thought for a moment there were cobwebs, and there aren't, in fact.
So what does that mean?
Could be somebody is building up, trying to show themselves, or feel that there is. But I feel definitely there's something in the building, in these basements. I don't feel it's anything to be frightened of, and my feeling is that it's more of a presence than a ghost, a feeling of a past thing. And there's obviously been a heck of a lot happened in this building. It goes back for some years, and what was on the site before and all this. And it's interesting that certain area is the sad area. I feel quite happy here, but I have this.
And you're only 6 feet away from the sad area.
6 feet away from it. Yeah, sure. And it would be interesting to know what had been here, and then you could tell what is behind the wall. Does the landlord know?
Yes, on the other side of there now is literally just rubble. Just rubble.
But were they caves going through to the Broad Marsh?
Yes, I mean
complex?
the whole area is completely riddled with caves. And as you pointed out, Lee, I mean it's quite fascinating the different interpretations of presence down here. I recall 20 years ago, many people spoke about very strange happenings down here. But then again, the owner of this business, before I took it over, had a reputation for many very strange parties, sexual deviations and perversions and things like this. And so we thought perhaps all the rumours of ghosts were literally just rumours to keep people away from private happenings and things like that. At the end of the day, who can tell?
But you see, the thing is that so often, and I mean, we've got to keep our feet on the ground on this thing, so often you get haunted pubs, haunted theatres, you know, let's get bums on seats, if you want to give the expression, at this time of the morning, or people into your premises. And I'm always very wary when anybody says, oh, I've got a haunted restaurant, haunted pub. I mean, the pubs we've had tonight. And well, I'm trying to do his business. But what I wanted to say was, on behalf of this gentleman, really, that certainly as I'm in this area and in this basement, I do feel a presence of something here, but I don't feel
I'm interested in this cobweb thing. Can you go in the corner again, just to see if it happens again?
Sure.
And tell me honestly if you think it does. There are no cobwebs anywhere near.
No.
Is it happening again?
No, I've wiped my face and it seems to have cleared. But I am still aware of almost a prickly sensation behind my head because I've got it practically on.
What do you feel?
We're all picking up a strange ticking sound.
Could be the beat of the music.
The thing with that is, none of us are particularly bothered because there's equipment all around us, but it's also being picked up on the mics as well, which it shouldn't be picked up on because they're very close.
Well, I can hear it.
You can hear it as well. We can all hear it. It's like a ticking.
But you see, Diane, it's rather, as you said, you know, this can be pipes and bubbles away in pipes. There is a central heating system that we turned off when we went into that little cubbyhole there in the cellar.
But we're all on close fixed mics or whatever you call them. They're not supposed to pick up anything just outside this particular area, and we're all picking it up on the.
It could be the central heating. I'm not, I'm not disclaiming
well,
that. But
what we better do, we better talk to a listener, and hopefully, listening back in the studio is Layla Bishop. Layla, can you hear a ticking sound?
No, we can't hear anything. Nothing at all.
Because we can definitely hear a ticking sound here, and it appeared to be on our headphones here.
Do you want to stop talking a sec and we'll have a listen? Yes, we've got it. We've got it too.
You can hear it.
Yeah.
But no, it's not coming from that pipe. It's coming from the interior wall. The wall there. That's the area.
While we're investigating, if I can just share a story about this.
Yes.
A friend of mine was called out, a priest up in the Mansfield area. He was called out at 2 o'clock in the morning by a very distraught lady. And she said, I've got tappings under my floor. And he went along with her dark in the middle of the night. And sure enough, there were these tappings underneath the floor. And he said his hair stood up on the back of his neck. Anyway, it was bull night. And mine was working all night through, and it was the strata was carrying up from the pit down below, was carrying the tap of the picks up into the room.
The Hippo is interesting. In February 1971, there was a report that the staff here were cleaning up the Hippo restaurant between 1:30 and 3 o'clock in the morning, and they saw bottles and glasses smashing themselves and experienced a great drop in temperature. The manager at that time went to lock the basement rooms down here at 1:30 in the morning, and on opening a door, just to check that all was well, saw a dark figure sitting at one of the tables, which I rather think is where we were as we went to that little cubbyhole there. Now, that figure was wearing a Quaker costume this time, with a dark coat and a large hat, but the face was frightening. It was an oval mist with no features, and the staff also heard footsteps in the basement here. And this room was only discovered 18 years ago, in 1969, when the building was being renovated. This room was probably connected with the ancient caves which honeycombed the old Broadmarsh area of Nottingham. But this business about the face, you know, not having any detail on the face, is a sort of very common one on reportings, isn't it, Lee?
Well, I'm not really the person to answer this, you see, because being clairvoyant, clairaudient...
Well, what do you see when you say you see a figure?
Well, I usually see a form, I see a face.
And you see definite features?
Definite features, yeah. But you see, am I seeing clairvoyantly, or am I just... you see, I've got to be absolutely honest about it. The nearest I've got to a ghost, as such, seeing one in the flesh, was when I was a lad, and I was working on the newsagents, wholesale newsagents, And I was going to work one morning about 4 o'clock, 4:30, and we lived up by the railway lines, and I'm walking up by the lines on the road, this is, and suddenly I heard this creaking behind me, creak, creak, creak. I was a 15, 16-year-old kid and knew nothing about psychics then. And as this noise got nearer and nearer, and I dared to turn round, and there was this headless form riding a bicycle up behind me. And I've got to be honest, I was absolutely terrified. And I couldn't do anything about it. It was coming nearer and nearer to me. And as it came to me, as a kid, I suppose the nearest thing I could do was my nervous reaction, I suppose, was to go and jump behind the bike and give the bloke a push because it was up the hill. And a head came out of the top coat and said, "Thanks very much, mate."
All right. We have our programme researcher here, and like Neil, I think you ought to go outside and see about this ticking, and see if it is coming, because it appears to be coming from the other side of that wall, and it obviously is concerning us. You reckon it's coming from the top?
I reckon it's above. I've listened to the pipes, I've been outside. As far as I can understand, it's actually above us.
Yeah.
Above us.
But it's...
To me, as if it's here, just above us.
Yes, but again, it's one of those things where you said, Diane, you hear these noises and there could be a rational explanation for them.
Yes.
Let's go to calls. Christopher Crew is calling from Bilborough. Christopher?
No, it's not from Bilborough, it's from Carlton, actually.
From Carlton, sorry, Christopher.
That's all right. My experience happened in Bilborough. First of all, can I tell you these two stories, then after that ask a question?
Go on then.
Would that be okay?
Yes.
Well, it was when I was 15. I used to go out a lot, obviously, at that age, and I got locked out. Anyway, eventually I got in, and I think I made myself a sandwich, and I was going up to bed, and on my arrival halfway upstairs, I seen a Roman, all in his gear, and standing on the stairs. And I thought to myself, well, I'm not going to be frightened. I sort of adopted it rationally. I thought, well, I'm not going to be frightened. And I went right up to it, and I put my hand straight through it. And then I reached the top of the stairs, then I was frightened. So I came back down, sat in the living room, and I felt the whole house appeared to be shaking, but obviously it was me with fright. So anyway, time passed, forgotten all about it. Quite recently I was speaking to my brother about this, about 6 or 7 months ago, and he said, well, that's very strange, the same thing happened to me. And he put his hand through it too. Wasn't very nice, actually.
So what was the question you were going to ask?
Well, I'll come to the question in a minute. Now, after a few months after that, I used to do a lot of walking then, and I went to walk, say, the bottom of Beachdale Road, and that is a very long stretch of road. I was with a friend, and we seen in the distance a man dressed in very dark clothing. Now, on the stretch of road where we particularly was, and the man was, there was no turnings. And this, I looked to tell my friend, look at that man there, and then he just disappeared. So we ran up the road to find out where he could have turned in, but there was nowhere he could turn in. Because at that time there's woods, and it was all being fenced off. So he couldn't have gone in there, or if he did, he would have to climb over the fence and what have you. But he just disappeared. Now my question is, whenever people talk about things like this, I wonder why it is you always feel that there is something there. Do you know what I mean?
No, I don't quite know what you do mean.
Well, if you talk about ghosts or anything, I always feel that there is something there with you. If you get a group of people talking about these things, you always get a feeling that there is something else there with you.
Well, Canon John Finney is nodding his head. John?
Yes, I think isn't it straightforward, Barbara, that, if you start talking about this sort of thing, it's very easy to, or if you watch a film late at night, one of these horror movies, very easy to start your imagination running riot, and you start imagining all sorts of things happening. Every shadow in the room seems to hold a figure. Isn't it something like this, Christopher?
Yes, it is. And by the way, I can hear this ticking over the phone. So.
Well, yes, so can we. We're fairly convinced that it is something wrong with the pipes, because after the first tick, there was a second lot of ticking, and now there are 3 loads of ticking. So we're fairly sure. Christopher, thank you very much indeed.
No, that's okay.
Rob Brookfield of Mickleover. Rob.
Hello.
Yes, your story.
Well, about 10 years ago, I
I was walking down Mickleover Hollow, which is one of the oldest parts of Mickleover, and the street lights, one on the corner of the hollow, had been vandalised. So where I was in the light, and in the distance I could see the light just past the corner. I could see this guy dressed in like a long trench coat. He walked from where the light was into the darkness where there were no lights on, and I walked in as well, just naturally expecting to go past him. Well, on one side of the road there's a very high stone wall with like a hedge above. The other side of the road there's a red brick wall, right? As I walked into the darkness, a car came down behind me, and the car's headlights shone ahead, and this guy just vanished. Anyway, I kind of went home quite frightened about it, quite worried. I told my parents about it, but didn't really say anything much to anybody else because I thought most people would just laugh at it, like, you know. So about 6 years went by, and then one morning my mother was talking to a woman who used to work at the Nag's Head up in Mickleover as a pot washer, and she'd said that one night her lift hadn't arrived, about 30 years ago this was, so she decided to walk down. As she walked down, this guy appeared. Exactly the same thing happened. Anyway, we managed to find out that there was a murder occurred down there donkeys years ago, and there's always been an old rhyme associated with the area about seeing a ghost in that particular place. So it seems all pretty linked together.
Does. Rob, thank you very much indeed. Thank you.
Thanks.
Most of the ghost stories that you come across in books are set off in far remote areas of the British Isles where mist from the sea engulfs the land and makes small country cottages very inviting to spirits. The solitude, the history and the distance all add to the tale. But the next item we have is true, and that may surprise you because it's set in exactly the type of location and circumstances I've mentioned. Our reporter is Royson Walsh.
This is Cunyin near Brookborough, County Fermanagh. It's a quiet, still September morning, and I am standing outside a small two-storey house which is about 100 years old. An ordinary enough-looking old house. But strange things happened here some 60 years ago. Inside, the house is completely derelict. The bedroom doors are all open, except for this one. And outside, the window is boarded up. And behind this door and window is the Cunyin ghost. The ghost appeared between 1913 and 1914, and as in many other cases, it followed children, 3 of them aged between 9 and 13. A priest who investigated it more than 50 times described it as coming down like the sound of straw in the air. He heard it snoring in the dark and moving like snakes beneath him. When a light was lit, a human form collapsed under the sheets. This priest actually made contact with Johnny, as he called the ghost, and was able to get response from it. He asked it to whistle, and it obliged. He suggested it came from hell. The response was a loud hiss. When asked questions, it answered in taps. For example, how many people are here? And it tapped a reply. The ghost later followed an older girl of the family. When she lay on the bed, a rush came into the room and stopped at the top of it. And the knocking started vigorously. It then went out through the ceiling. When the mother lay down, there was silence. Charlie McCann was in the house when the ghost came one night.
Well, I'll tell you now, I was there several nights. And it would maybe you'd hear nothing when you'd win till you'd be in a while. It could come in across, walk across, and you see them stones there.
Yeah.
It could go down through the middle of them, see if there was a hole into the ground.
Down through a solid wall?
Down through the solid stone. And into the flags here.
And what did it do when it came into the house?
Yeah, what could you do? You just listen to it, all you could do.
But what did the ghost do?
Well, they couldn't get no pace. It was up to some children you seen they couldn't get no rest with it. One wee year in particular. When I put them to bed, it'll go to the bed too, do you see? But no one's never ever seen it.
It just made noises then?
It just made the noise. You ought to hear the flags ripping at the road. And the others. There was one wee lassie, and this fella told her to sit down on the end of his stool. How much she sat down on the end of the stool, the minute she sat down on the end of the stool, it just got that just right, lifting him up off it.
Did you actually see that?
Eh?
Did you actually see that yourself?
I was sitting behind him just when it happened.
How often did it come to the house?
Oh, it was there for months, as far as I know.
Were there many other things that it did?
Well, no, it was just sort of this, making this noise and tormenting the place and tormenting the children, you see. No matter where they went, it went. If you had them in the car, where were you there now? It would be with you.
Yes. Well, how did you feel whenever you heard it?
Oh, I never bothered in the head. It annoyed me a bit.
The Murphy family finally emigrated to America. The 3 priests who attempted to exorcise the Cunyin ghost suffered rather badly. One from a nervous breakdown, another from spinal meningitis, and a third from facial paralysis.
Well, that was our reporter, Royson Walsh, on ghosts in strange places. We're now going over to, not such a strange place, the Malt Shovel at Shardlow, and our reporter...
And reveal the location. And to do that for me, here's Bruce of... let's even get his title right. It's Bruce Barrymore Halpenny, who's an author and RAF ghost expert. Where are we?
We're at a disused airfield just outside of Lincoln at the old RAF Fiskerton airfield.
Now, we have been talking about its history throughout the evening. During the last few minutes, a group has tracked down our location, come onto the airfield, and has said that there were a few flashes and possibly bangs from the area which we think is the observation core.
That's right, which is a purpose-built site that they've got on the other section of the airfield, one of the old dispersal pans.
Now, there have been some strange sightings there as well, haven't there?
Yes, they've had 2 or 3 that have been substantiated by a phantom officer that has been seen in the complex. But of course, owing to security reasons, it's not possible to substantiate this. And of course, naturally, these have been denied. But they are by people involved in the complex, and the sightings have been positive.
Why do you think that the Ministry of Defence is so coy about it and doesn't really want to be drawn into the issue?
It's just something that they cannot admit to, actually.
Let's have a quick chat with John Turner of the Lincolnshire Psychic Research Group. Now that we have revealed the location, what sort of stories would you like to bring out as we draw towards the close of our Lincolnshire Ghost Watch?
Well, I personally had one very interesting experience in that I was going to bed very late one night. It was about 2:30 in the morning, and myself and my wife had just got into bed, and we heard aircraft engines. Now, once you heard a Merlin engine, you never forget it, and this was a Merlin engine, and it was coming closer and closer and getting louder and louder, and I was quite convinced that in actual fact it was going to crash into the house. And it was obvious as it was getting lower as it got nearer. And then it seemed just to pass just over the roof. But then suddenly the noise of the engines just cut out. They didn't fade, it just stopped completely. And my first reaction was, oh, it's crashed. But there was nothing to be found. And later on I mentioned this to someone, and they'd been in the Home Guard at the time during the war, and he remembered actually being called out to guard a crashed aircraft which had crashed in a field only about 100 yards from the house.
Now, you heard the engine, but did anybody else hear it?
Well, my wife did. I mean, we both heard it quite clear. That's to be quite honest, we were scared to start with because we were convinced it was going to crash into the house. It was that low.
Now, we were talking about sensing that psychic powers are in evidence. Is it just yourself and your wife who are able to sense this engine going across, or were various people around your locality saying, we heard it as well?
Well, we never heard of anyone else. As far as I know, it was just the 2 of us.
I just quickly want to bring in what we've been talking about when we haven't been on the air, about it not being a gift that you can sense these powers. How would you describe it?
It's not a gift. Everyone has the ability if they're prepared to develop it. You've got to go about developing it, and you must do it under supervision as well.
Obviously brings us around to what Dennis was saying about you mustn't dabble in the supernatural.
Oh, no. definitely not. It can be dangerous to dabble, but you must do it under supervision. That supervision of another medium.
Well, that's the position so far on the Fiskerton airstrip in Lincolnshire. Hardly any lights on at all now. The mist is still all around the car, but no more activity. We'll bring you up to date on that flash that we told you about just after 11 o'clock, see if we can think of any possible reason. Or it might even happen again. We don't know. We've still got 20 minutes to go, but that's it from Lincolnshire Ghost Watch for the moment.
Thank you very much, Andy. We will come to you for a report just before the end of the programme. There are many stories of haunted mines in the East Midlands. Babington Colliery in Nottinghamshire, near the M1, has several reported sightings. In 1954, the afternoon shift of a gang of 5 miners saw emerging from an opening a figure, not dressed in modern overalls, but in the rough clothes of years gone by. The figure stood with folded arms as though inspecting the work the miners were doing. One of the miners went towards the unexpected visitor, but it turned back into an old working at the mine. Now, some years later, a man appeared out of the gloom with his face mutilated and ambled along and just disappeared. And there's evidently a well-known story at Babington Colliery of a miner who had difficulty in opening 2 heavy doors. He managed to open one of the doors and heard a voice behind the second door saying, "I'll give you a hand." The door easily swung open, but there was no one behind it. And another incident at the pit was rather strange. A man walked into the cage at the bottom of the shaft. When the cage reached the surface, the doors were opened and the cage was empty. But the strangest story from Babington concerned a team of miners who just finished their shift. They saw a figure in rough clothes, but not modern clothes. It wore a flat cap and waistcoat, and yet it had a brilliant white scarf around its neck. As the miners approached the figure, it disappeared. But on the spot where it had stood, they found the tattered remains of a once white scarf. And of course the most recent reporting of something happening down a pit was reported in the Nottingham Evening Post on Thursday, October the 8th this year. I'll read the item. Ghost scare for Notts pitman. A Nottinghamshire miner had to be tied to a stretcher and carried out of a local colliery after he saw a ghost. The pitman claimed to have seen an apparition wearing overalls and a helmet disappearing through a wall in old mine workings in Cotgrave Colliery. British Coal said the miner, who is remaining anonymous, was very distressed and had been given time off to recover. He was kept secure on a stretcher as he was so upset. He was taken to the pit's medical centre where he was able to tell colleagues what he'd seen. The incident happened during a shift yesterday. A British Coal spokesman said stories always circulated of haunted pits, but never before at Cotgrave, a relatively modern pit. 2 days later, October 10th, it hit the headlines, again in the Nottingham Evening Post. Scared miners are refusing to work alone in the remote spot underground at the Nottinghamshire Colliery where a young pit worker says he saw a ghost. Shift workers at Cotgrave Colliery will only go into the area in pairs, according to one face worker. He said fear had spread through the workforce since Gary Pine, 19, of Cotgrave, was stretchered, screaming and hysterical from the pit on Wednesday. Colleagues said they found him crying alone a quarter of a mile underground. He reported seeing an apparition in overalls and a helmet. It had disappeared through a concrete wall, he said. Now, one of the people mixed up in that story in a national newspaper was one of our guests tonight, Canon John Finney. But I gather, John, you're rather disputing the national press story.
Yes, this was in one of the, shall we say, the not quality newspapers, where I was supposed to have gone along to Cotgrave and exercised this, that and the other. In fact, I'd never been near Cotgrave for many months, so it was entirely false.
Right, we're going to Gilbert Fawcett of Clipston, a miner. Gilbert?
Yes.
Your story?
It's about my sister and me. I had an accident down 4 years ago, and my sister told me quite a few months afterwards that before I had the accident, when I stood in their kitchen doorway, she could see someone stood behind me. And my mother died a few weeks ago, and she said the same thing happened again.
Do you work at Clipston Colliery?
No.
Which colliery do you work at?
Over.
Because you see, you live at Clipston, don't you?
Yeah.
Because in 1984, at Clipston, you tell me if you've heard this story, there's a report that 2 young miners fled in terror after an encounter with a ghost dressed in the working clothes and safety helmet of the type now on display in the Mining Museum. and one of the miners said he put a hand on his shoulder and he just froze and became hysterical. Now, that was Clipston Colliery, 1984. Have you heard that story?
No, I haven't, no.
But there are many stories of hauntings in pits, aren't there?
Yeah. There's parts down Bolsover Pit. I've never seen anything, but I feel very uncomfortable.
All right, grateful to you ringing us, Gilbert. Thank you very much indeed.
Yeah, I just wonder if anyone there could explain what my sister's actually seeing.
Well, now this might well mix in with another query from a listener, and I'd like to discuss this with any of the panel here who perhaps would like to try and answer it. You're saying that your sister saw a figure behind you in the doorway.
That's right.
You didn't see the figure?
No.
She did? Right. Yeah. Anybody would like to comment on that one? Lee Lacey.
Could be a natural clairvoyant that, saw this. Which could be an explanation for it.
Well, that's all we've got for you, Gilbert.
Yeah.
Okay, but we had a call from a listener who has an unusual one, and I don't know if this ties up, Lee, with something that you experienced in the cellar just now when we were over at the other side of the cellar. This listener says, can you explain that she once saw a different face over the face of her husband once?
Yeah. Well,
is that a known phenomenon?
I have witnessed transfiguration. There are mediums that specialise in this, where a spirit entity will build up over the face of another one and show themselves for recognition purposes.
All right, thank you. We've got Peter Kay of Belper on the line. Peter?
Hello, Dennis.
Your story.
Yes. Well, I'm aged 34 and I live in a bungalow in Belper, and I've lived here for 8 years. Now, when I first moved in, within about 6 months, one evening I went to the toilet, the smallest room in the bungalow, and I ran out, literally ran out after putting the light on, because I saw a face and a head there, probably about 7 or 8 foot above the floor sort of level. No body, just a face looking at me. I ran out, and I was absolutely petrified. I mean, I don't believe in ghosts. I've never believed in ghosts in my life, but I believe I saw this. My wife got the cat. She said, well, the cat will detect anything if there's anything suspicious, and there's no reaction whatsoever from the cat, so we rather dismissed that. However, when we had some friends over for dinner shortly afterwards, they've got twins, young children, age about 3, and that they wouldn't go in the toilet. They were terrified, that they screamed every time they went in there. They screamed. And my friend, his wife, said, it seems very chilly, very, very cold in this toilet, you see. And I said, well, I mean, there's no heating in the toilet, for goodness sake, you know. And shortly afterwards, a few months later, wife and I lying in bed, about 1 o'clock in the morning, terrible crash in the hall, an awful sound, and it woke us both up. We didn't know what it was, and eventually, it took a long time, plucked up some courage and went into the hall, couldn't see anything whatsoever, and then realised the mirror that was hanging up on the wall had crashed down onto the floor. Now, it hadn't broken, but it was lying there on the floor for no apparent reason whatsoever. It was held up with a nice piece of string, you know, on the hanger on the wall, and the string, it had snapped. I have no idea why. I don't understand it. However, the mirror again was in the hall, not too far from where the toilet's situated. Probably many months later, we went away for a weekend on holiday. I'm a radio amateur, by the way, a radio ham. I have radios in every room, including the smallest room in the house. We came back after 2 or 3 days, walked in the house. As soon as I opened the front door, I thought, that's funny, there's a radio on. Couldn't understand it, and sort of thought, we haven't been burgled, for goodness sake, surely. No, I mean, nothing seemed upset at all. Walked around, where's the music coming from? It's coming from the radio, in the toilet. Well, I mean, there's no way we'd go out with that on, but there it was, playing away. And a few months later, yet again, I had my relatives around for dinner, uncle and auntie, and we were chatting, eating, drinking, I hasten to add. But suddenly the conversation stopped as he said, something's just happened. He said, something has just walked across the dining room, or moved, to use his words, moved across the dining room into your hall. I don't know what it was, he said, but, you know, I said, well, honestly, I didn't notice anything. no sensation whatsoever. But he was absolutely convinced something had moved towards the hall, and say we are in a bungalow, and the toilet is off the hall. The owner of the property was built about 50 years ago by the previous owner. We bought it off his wife. He died, and he died in the toilet, Dennis. I'd just love to know what the people there think about that. It's absolutely true what I've told you. I don't believe in ghosts. I still don't believe in ghosts, but that is what has happened, and it all happened 5, 6, 7, 8 years ago. I've now got a son who's 4 years old, and I don't know why, but since he's been born, nothing ever has happened again in this place.
Right, well now, two of our panel were nodding furiously with you, Peter, when you were telling the story of seeing the face above you in the toilet.
Yes, well...
One was Diane Blatherwick, our psychic investigator. Why were you nodding, Diane?
It sounds interesting. It's curious.
Just that. It's not a pattern. I thought you were identifying a pattern there of something.
Well, there could be a pattern.
There was nobody. It was just a face looking at me when I walked in. That was the thing.
Well, maybe you're picking up something. I mean, like Lee Lacey says, there's some sort of replay back on time.
And Canon John Finney was also nodding furiously. John?
Yes, I would say these are fairly typical symptoms that you quite often come across when a house is being infested in this sort of way. I would certainly get somebody in to pray through it.
Yes.
Just him to go through each room, especially the smallest room.
Yes.
And pray in each room.
Yes.
But nothing happened in the last 4 years.
No, nothing at all.
Quite.
So would you now ignore it, or would you?
I would be inclined to pray through. It has that history. There's probably a certain degree of nervousness on the part of you, Peter, I should imagine, and your wife, isn't there?
Are you friendly? Have you got a local priest you're friendly with, Peter?
Well, not particularly. I'm not particularly religious or interested in ghosts or anything.
Don't worry about that, Peter. The local ministers will quite happy to help you, whether you go to church or not.
Yes. Well, perhaps I should mention it to them. I haven't done. But
Anyway, Peter, a fascinating story. Thank you very much indeed.
Right, thank you, Dennis. Bye-bye.
If you were listening earlier in the programme, you'll recall that we heard the story of a ghost in a theatre. We decided at the time that theatres up and down the country are often full of tales of hauntings. Stephen Alexander is a theatre clairvoyant. He investigates sightings and spirits that belong to the stage. And he's recently been to investigate the sighting we heard about. But he first told our reporter Neil Pringle how his ghost-busting in theatres started.
Well, it came about really because I work predominantly with the BBC, and we were looking for some kind of series, that hasn't been covered in the past, and I've been involved in theatre myself all my life, so we thought that most theatres in the country, certainly older theatres, profess to have some kind of ghost or whatever, or ghoulie.
And do they?
Yeah, they do actually. About 80% of all reported ghosts exist.
Right, so when you look into a ghost at a theatre, what's this ghost busting entail then? You're trying to get rid of them, or just making contact, or what?
Just making contact, really. Most of the ghosts attached to the theatre are sort of there haunting the place, if you like, because they want to be there. They like being there. Therefore, they're not malevolent. They're nice ghosts, if you like, okay? And they're there to help people. So we're not trying to disturb them or get rid of them in most cases. What we're doing is establishing who the spirit is, or who the spirit was when they were alive. And up to now, we've been quite successful. We were at the Old Vic last week in Bristol, and the Old Vic, of course, is one of the oldest theatres in the country. And there'd been many, many reported sightings of a lady in one of the boxes up in the Gods. And so I went along, and we found out who it was. And in actual fact, it was an old actress, a Victorian actress called Sarah Siddons, who's very, very famous. And she gave us a name quite, without much trouble at all.
Gosh, does that sort of thing happen all the time? Going to theatres and then finding out people's names, or is it not that easy?
Sometimes it's more difficult than others. We were also, the day after the Old Vic case, we were at the Theatre Royal in Bath. And that was a very reluctant spirit that didn't want to tell us at first. We did crack it in the end. We found out who it was and what had happened there, how she'd died. She'd actually died in the theatre, that particular spirit, which is a bit unusual.
Well, what are these ghosts, then? There's a question for you.
There's a question. Well, ghosts, apparitions, whatever you want to call them, are basically, very, very basically, the principle is that it's almost like photography, if you like. It's a negative imprint that's left on the Earth's atmosphere by somebody who's passed away, that really didn't want to go, that really wanted to linger in the place where they were most happy. And very simply, that's what a ghost is.
So part of the person has actually moved on, but part of the person is still behind. Is that right?
That's right. The actual soul, if you like, the living organism of the person, just sort of goes into the atmosphere as an energy source.
And if you remember the earlier tale we heard from the theatre, Siddons was the name we heard mentioned. Well, we've had a ghost watch for nearly 3 hours now in the East Midlands. We've got a couple of radio cars out there in the wilds, certainly in the wilds of Lincolnshire, on the airfield that we've named as the former RAF airfield at Fiskerton. Our reporter, Andy Smith.
Yes, and it's still very cold here, I must admit. I'm glad we've come to the end of our 3 hours of watching, and it has been eventful because, as we mentioned earlier, just after 11 o'clock, there was that flash. And just to briefly recap, here's John Turner of the Lincolnshire Psychic Research Group.
Yes, this was something that went past very, very fast. I didn't have a chance to see what it was. We were all aware of it, which I'm rather glad. It's not just me that was aware of it. As I say, we were all aware of it, but it was too fast. But whilst I've been here tonight, a name keeps coming back to me. And the name is Travers, and the rank of Wing Commander. Now, I've told that to Bruce, and I understand that he will look into it.
Is there any reason why this name should just suddenly come to you?
No, none that I know of.
Not connected with this flash, perhaps?
No, this has come since that. It's just the name Travers and the rank of Wing Commander.
Well, let's go to Bruce Barrymore-Halpenny, the author and RAF ghost expert. What do you make of that?
Possibly. What I will do now is check the files to see if there's anyone by that name that's been on the airfield during the war period or when it was operational.
Are you hopeful that something will come from this? Because I know you've had a lot of people that have told you lots of information, and in most cases you've been able to prove it.
That's right. It's been most rewarding, actually, and to find people turning out and coming and so sincere. This is the thing, and it's been very, very nice to know that we've not upset anyone, and it's been very, very rewarding.
Now, we've spent 3 hours here. There was that flash. Are you disappointed that there wasn't perhaps something a bit more concrete coming out across the airfield?
Well, it's not a matter of being disappointed. It's a matter of just coming here. As I say, we're now intruding on the earthbound spirits, and so it's impossible to come and expect to see something or feel something, and so I think we've been very fortunate to have as we have done tonight.
Andy, thank you very much indeed, and will you thank your guest there for braving the elements, I think we could say, tonight.
Indeed I will, Dennis. I would just like to say I would like to thank the various groups of people that have tracked us down, because we haven't said where the location was, and Penny Kitchen in particular from Hayington, who brought us that story of the dog and the lights in the disused hangar at RAF Hemswell.
Yeah, most interesting. Andy, thank you very much.
Okay.
Andy Smith, our reporter with the BBC Radio Lincolnshire radio car. And in Derby, at the Malt Shovel at Shardlow, our reporter Gary Andrews in the radio car. Gary.
Andy Smith saying that he's glad to be coming to the end of his 3 hours, and I must admit I share that sentiment. I'm not feeling too good at the moment. There are only a few of us left here at the Malt Shovel, but everybody around is sensing that they're feeling very cold. Now, whether that's just the time of night or whether it's just because of the stories we've been listening to during the 3 hours, we don't really know. We're all very tense here. Peter Harrison, do you sense anything unusual tonight?
No, not really. I'm still in high spirits.
So there's nothing unusual happening for you tonight?
No, not really, but these things never appear when you want them to anyway, do they?
When was the last time Humphrey did appear?
About 3 months ago.
And nothing since?
No, nothing since, except for, No, nothing really. No sighting, anyway. Put it
Anyway,
that way.
Gary, thank you very much because you tried hard.
All right. Sorry we couldn't do any more for you.
No, grateful to you and your guests.
Okay, bye-bye
Thank
for
you.
now.
Gary Andrews in our BBC Radio Derby radio car. Well, I must admit I'm a little disappointed that we haven't had something a little more positive tonight on our Ghostwatch in the East Midlands, but we have had one or two unusual things happening. Certainly in Lincolnshire on the airfield there's that unexplained light. That's unusual. It might be able to be explained. It may never be explained. And here at the cellar of the Hippo Club on Bridlesmith Gate, Nottingham, we've heard ticking, but that could have been anything, particularly when more ticking was heard. We may even have a Death Watch beetle on the premises. I don't know about that. But a brief word from our panel who've listened intently to all the stories tonight. Lee Lacey, our medium. I think we probably got nearer with you than perhaps anything else that happened on the programme, that there was perhaps there's something about this cellar.
Oh, yes, certainly there's something about this cellar. Remembering that I am clairvoyant, I am clairaudient, so I would be more sensitive to things than other people. There's nothing to be frightened of in this cellar. A point I'd like to make just before we do finish, Dennis, that so many of these stories that we've heard, somebody says, oh, we've seen, we've heard, and the imagination gets to work and it builds up. And in collieries, and when we were in the army, like my Barbie ghost, was always, it built up, and people, and in the mines there must be an awful lot of kind of trying to gee the lads up or frighten the lads. And I would say it's very, very rare that we come across. Diana, when she comes on, will probably tell you 9 out of 10 cases of reported ghosts are rubbish, or people that are not quite well, or things like this. And people needn't be frightened too much. There are experts to call on if they are.
Well, you say needn't be frightened. I said that earlier about this programme to someone, but it's very easy to say don't be frightened. When it happens, you can be scared still.
Yes, but then's the time to call in the experts.
All right. Chris Sky, our white witch. Do you think many black witches have been about tonight, Halloween?
I should imagine there's been quite a few, actually, and I should imagine there's been quite a few out-of-body experiences, causing quite a lot of disturbance.
Are you disappointed tonight that there wasn't something more positive?
I didn't really expect anything in these sort of circumstances. It's too analytical, and that's the best thing about being analytical. Anything that you're curious about, anything that you're worried about, analyse it, and you can guarantee